Why hello my fellow apes, I hope you are well. Here's a question that I kindly received. I've seen some prominent creators say that they would worship a big fella if one was proven to exist. I was wondering if you'd agree with this, or decide not to worship. For me, I'd feel that I'd need a fairly good explanation for all the evil acts before I could legitimately worship. I guess I'm mostly wondering what it would take for you to fully worship a god, or is proof of existence enough? Well, first of all, thank you for the question. I really appreciate it. Now, you are, perhaps not surprisingly, barking up the same tree that I would. Theists like to act as if there's just one proposed god, theirs, and they often assume that others know precisely the type of god they've got in mind when they ask, for instance, would you worship God if his existence was proven? On this, I have two prominent thoughts. The first is that the level of respect I'd issue towards a god would depend entirely on that god's attributes and acts. So to illustrate this, let's take two really similar versions of the Christian God, with one upholding the traditional doctrine of hell being a place of eternal torment, and the other upholding the doctrine of universalism, the view that all humans will ultimately be saved and restored to a right relationship with God. These two doctrines, by themselves, entail a very, very different God to one another. They fundamentally change what God is. Now, as far as I'm convinced, hell as a place of eternal torment is absolutely insane, both as an idea and as something that an omnipotent and omnibenevolent being would ever consider endorsing, let alone establishing. This version of hell, which most Christians and Muslims insist upon, is beyond pathetic. You know, let me dig up a quote from Isaac Asimov that's always resonated with me. Infinite torture can only be a punishment for infinite evil, and I don't believe that infinite evil can be said to exist, even in the case of Hitler. I agree with Asimov. I can't see how anyone could ever deserve eternal torment, and I think that those who say that they can see it have frankly got their eyes closed. They're not using their imagination to conceive, even tacitly, what such a hell would look like, or they're buying some really weird proposition, such as that a finite being can somehow infinitely harm God. There's lots to unpack here. But to get back on track, not only do I find the traditional view of hell to inspire disdain, but unless God or something would additionally convince me that somehow some people are worthy of eternal torment, there's no chance that I could ever at least earnestly worship such a warden of depravity. That said, I would, out of pure fear and extortion, likely worship God, but of course, courtesy of his omniscience, he'd know that I'm faking it. So outside of this tall order that I've just presented, I would not earnestly worship the God that most Christians and Muslims believe in. I actually find their God to be evil. Very, very evil. If, on the other hand, we assume universalism, and we're also willing to buy Molinism, the view that God knows all true counterfactuals of creaturely freedom, and thus uses this middle knowledge in conjunction with his omniscience to create only people he knew would freely enter into a relationship with him, then there's a version of worship, which I'll get to in just a moment, that I can see myself offering God. It should be said, though, that universalism is not greatly supported by scripture, hence why it's not the traditional view. Or put another way, there's a reason why most Christians and Muslims opt for eternal torment. It's what's been primarily taught for thousands of years, and it's caused untold horrors. And this form of analysis that we've just done between these two doctrines of hell can, and I would say should, be conducted for a great many theistic considerations before we can truly understand the question we're being asked. Which theodicy, for instance, just to give one more example, is correct. Because if the greater good theodicy is correct, then God is a giga-chad consequentialist, using billions of humans, let alone other sentient beings, as mere cannon fodder. Nothing more than a means to an end. Would I really worship such a being? Well, outside of being additionally convinced of a whole array of propositions and, having my views massively altered on lots of propositions that I buy to be true, I doubt it. But let's assume now that God turns out to be something that doesn't contradict my moral dispositions, or better yet, disillusions me of my current thoughts so that my new thoughts align with his. Now, in this scenario, it's worth noting that I'm not really me anymore, but nevertheless, would I worship God given this scenario? Well, in the traditional sense of worship, that is, getting on my knees, singing songs of praise, etc., no, I wouldn't. I don't think that a mentally stable person would want such adoration, let alone an all-powerful deity. And I don't think that such a relationship is healthy, even when you have nothing but love for the person or thing that's being venerated. There are people and even ideals that I deeply respect and love, and metaphorically speaking, I'd certainly lower my knee for them in terms of sacrificing my time and resources for their benefit, but I wouldn't literally worship them. So I hope that that answers your question. It's a difficult one to answer since, both the concepts of God and worship are ambiguous. But I hope that what I've said has sufficiently given you, basically where I stand on the matter. Thank you.